been doing some work with a team of colleagues at NFER over the last year, looking at particular aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals obviously provide the overall architecture for the type of progress that we're trying to make as a global society. And I'll be looking at this particularly talking about socio-emotional learning and particularly Sustainable Development Goal 4.7. I think one of the things that I think we've all come to realize over the past 12 months with the impact of COVID is the importance of, as we've all been saying today, growing young people as individuals, as holistic individuals that develop all sorts of skills such as resilience, determination, empathy, reflectiveness, and the ability to weather the sorts of changes that we are increasingly going through as a global society. So, Sustainable Development Goal 4.7 is all about progress in the provision of a broader education beyond literacy and numeracy and other core subjects. Really, it underpins the other Sustainable Development Goals because by addressing the themes within this target, we achieve progress across all of the different Sustainable Development Goals. I think it's also very interesting when we think about the different Sustainable Development Goals within education. There's a particular focus on Sustainable Development Goal 4.1, which focuses on the development of literacy and numeracy, which speaks to some of the points that were being made earlier, questioning whether we have the right balance in terms of our emphasis and where we put our efforts as educators. So target 4.7 stipulates that all learners need to acquire knowledge and skills to promote sustainable development, including, among other things, education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship and appreciation of cultural diversity, and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So within that, there's a clear focus on global citizenship, education for sustainable development, but also a recognition of the importance of socio-emotional skills within that. I think it's also worth noting that of the SDG targets, 4.7.1, which focuses on the extent to which global citizenship education for sustainable development are mainstreamed in international education policies, curricula, teacher education, and student assessment. This is one of the goals on which we have the least amount of information. It's one of the goals which we struggle to monitor, which we struggle to assess the progress that we're making on. And when we have attempted to do it, we focused mainly on the knowledge side of things rather than on the other aspects of this goal. So the particular piece of work that I undertook with a group of my colleagues was to look at whether we could reframe this slightly, whether we could look at other sources of information in order to get a better picture of how we were progressing. So I mentioned just now that we focused primarily on cognitive, on knowledge. So the knowledge, the understanding, critical thinking and problem solving aspects about things like issues of citizenship and sustainable development. We've rather neglected the socio-emotional aspects and the behavioural aspects because they are more difficult for us to measure. So most of our measurement of activities have focused on the cognitive domain. So in recent cycles, we've seen in, for example, some of the large-scale international assessments, a focus on things like global citizenship or global competence, but these have really been tackling knowledge of global citizenship rather than the extent to which people practice global citizenship, the extent to which they're emotionally prepared for global citizenship. Similarly, in Southeast Asia, recently in the Southeast Asia Primary Learning Metrics Assessment, there was a focus on global citizenship and global competence. So it's important for us to recognise that there are all three domains within socio-emotional learning. when we move to thinking about curricula, again, we tend to focus on the cognitive aspects because it's what we feel comfortable with. It's how we can easily translate these aspects into our teaching, into our educating practices, into our educational policies. When we think about curriculum, we have different levels of our education systems, and we have different levels of curriculum. At the system level, you have what's intended, or what we term the intended environment, which is the national view of what our educational environment should be and the experience which students have within that system. Arguably, at the school level, we have a planned environment. So what our school's desired vision of education is and how that should be implemented. We also have the implemented environment in terms of what actually happens within a school and what actually happens within a classroom. So how do people teach? How do teachers engage with their students? What are the pedagogical practices that they put into place? We have within the classroom the experienced environment, which is what a student actually experiences in their day-to-day learning. So the opportunities that they're given to engage with learning, either through their teacher-student interactions or their peer-to-peer interactions within the classroom. And finally, we have internalized learning, which is arguably where most of our assessment and measurement efforts have gone, which is focusing on what have students learned? What are they able to do? And again, this is focusing primarily, arguably, on the cognitive side of things. So if we think about this within socio-emotional learning, we can see some of the different elements that we are considering and that we might want to consider when trying to sense whether we are helping children to develop their socio-emotional learning, to develop as more holistic learners. And importantly, we also need to see an alignment within those different levels. Often what we know happens is that at a system level, a policy may be expressed that might support the development of socio-emotional learning. However, what may not then happen is that may not, for various different reasons, translate into what happens at the school level and what happens at the classroom level, perhaps due to different forces, different pressures. It may be because of the pressure put on teachers in terms of the accountability structures that are in place to ensure that their students are getting good grades. It could be pressures at the school level in terms of budgets and the amount of resource which school leaders have to dedicate to some of the different elements. So we wanted to look at how we created these opportunities. So we looked for evidence of what we termed a breadth of skills. So the different socio-emotional skills that we might want to be developing. So could we find evidence of these within the intended environment at the policy level? Could we find evidence of these skills in the planned environment at the school level? And could we find evidence of these skills in the implemented or experienced environment? And I think what's important here to stress is that we were not looking at the internalized, we were not looking at the actual cognitive or socio-emotional or behavioral attainment. We were more focusing on things that we felt could be indicative of creating the opportunities for the development of a holistic learning experience. So based upon that, we were able to draw together a conceptual framework, looking at these different levels, looking for sources of information where we might find the indicators. So for example, at the system level, it could be embedded in national education policies and education sector plans and budgets. At the school level, in terms of school policies, the way in which academic activities are organised and school budgets and how school performance management is enacted. Drilling down further in towards the classroom, looking at lesson plans, schemes of work, evidence of wider school activities which would promote the sorts of learning and the sorts of learning opportunities in terms of the experienced environment, looking at the specific pedagogical practices that teachers were using to foster development. So was there a focus, as Ananta was talking about earlier, on rote memorization, or was there a focus on peer-to-peer interaction, on self-assessment, on assessment for learning, and not looking simply at the results of assessments and not looking just at test outputs and test results? So by working through this process and looking at different data sources, we were able to identify a series of indicators which were not exhaustive, they're not comprehensive, they don't cover everything, but they do provide what we feel is a pragmatic view of the extent to which an education system can create these opportunities to become and provide the sorts of learning opportunities that are required to develop socio-emotional skills. So looking at 3 thematic aspects, we were able to look at teaching and learning, identifying indicators relating to the vision, curriculum, pedagogies, teacher training, policies and materials that support the development of skills at the system, school and classroom level. Assessment and accountability, acknowledging the importance within education systems of assessment. We often hear that what gets assessed is what gets taught, and the washback effect from assessment and accountability. So looking at school accountability arrangements, student assessments for monitoring and supporting the development of a breadth of skills. And then finally looking at the broader enabling environments, so institutional arrangements, facilities, budget, policies and practices which support a positive learning environment and which support school engagement with the broader community. And through this, we were able to triangulate and identify at different points the extent to which alignment was occurring from the system level, so at policy, through to the school management level, but also down into the classroom. So this is a work which is still in progress, but it's, we feel, a very interesting development in terms of looking and considering the potential to have data and to monitor this particular sustainable development goal. That's the end of my presentation. I'd be very interested to answer any questions that anyone has. I've focused more on the conceptual side rather than the measurement side. I hope that's okay.